Hello and welcome back to my channel here, London Private Courses Videos. My name is Nafisa and today I'm going to be talking about using Bloom's taxonomy for developing your critical thinking and cognitive abilities. So I often speak about Bloom's taxonomy, and I always mention how it's interesting as educators when we are doing our teacher training that we get introduced to this and we find this pyramid both interesting and comprehensive in terms of the complexity of critical thinking skills. But what often baffles me is why we are not encouraged or we don't practice sharing this with students. Now, I've spoken about this before. If you've seen any of my presentations, you will be familiar with my own work and research in developing students' ability for critical thinking. Now, I focus on developing critical thinking for academic literacies, so that's reading and writing, of course, primarily. But also, I do actually look at critical thinking in more often educational, political, social context. And that leads me to the theory of critical pedagogy, which in a nutshell is an anti-oppressive theory of education, or it's a theory that proposes anti-oppressive systems of education. So that's very much the work of Paulo Freire, which you will be familiar if you know anything about my other channel and the things I've discussed on education and social justice. You will be familiar with that. And if you're not, you can, a quick Google search for any of my previous videos will give you a brief background idea. And of course, I'll link the videos in the description bar. So if you are interested, go ahead and have a look at that. But like I said, the interesting thing about this Bloom's taxonomy is that it's very resourceful for both educators and for students. And I think that as an educator personally, I find it very useful to share it with my students, whatever level they are, and to really ask them to reflect and assess where they think they are or what is being asked from them for tasks, assignments, assessments, you name it. So I think what really triggered this off for me was the complex marking criteria, which has a lot of technical jargon on there that doesn't really serve its purpose when students look at it and try to work out what it is they need to express to get a certain mark, or as they like to put it, to get the highest mark. So sharing this particular pyramid and the way the critical thinking skills are presented is something that I find extremely useful. And I think it's something that, people should know. And like I said, it starts off with, just developing the critical thinking skills and cognitive abilities for academic literacies, whatever level, but it goes a step further in creating students who are not passive and who are active in terms of, being change agents for wider socio-economic practices in their country. For example, anti-corruption, anti-oppression, that kind of thing, which obviously is a big focus of what I do as part of my research as a PhD student. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. I'm going to start by showing you the pyramid. We'll look at what exactly it is, and then we'll have a look at the pyramid, and then we'll have a quick discussion on the points there. So, using Bloom's taxonomy, if we start first with simply what is Bloom's taxonomy. So if you are an educator, you probably are familiar with it, but if you're not, absolutely no worries. It's quite a simple concept that is presented quite nicely. So Bloom's taxonomy is a set of hierarchical models used to classify educational learning objectives into levels of complexity. Bloom's taxonomy has 6 levels of intellectual skills, each one building upon the previous level. This hierarchy was designed and presented as a pyramid to help educators push students into higher level thinking or critical thinking, thus to develop more cognitive abilities. So here is the pyramid presented. Now, it's important for me, I find, to stress that obviously these skills exist. It's not something that Bloom's invented. It's just the way it's presented and the way that the complexity levels are presented, so that you can actually look and see which are the most simple, and then gradually going up to what are considered to be the more complex thinking skills. But of course, as human beings, these are innate qualities that people do possess. And I fundamentally believe that people of all cultures do possess these, but I think it is the role of educators, it's the role of teachers to ignite it and, to get the flame going, if that makes sense. Because, a lot of cultures, a lot of teaching varies from cultures to cultures. So what is practiced in Western style education is very different to perhaps, the Eastern more conservative styles of teaching, in terms of teacher control and student-centeredness. But I fundamentally believe that these qualities are there in every human. It just takes an educator as a facilitator to kind of, get the ball rolling and to kind of awaken these skills within the certain individual. And of course, like I said, even though I focus specifically on academic literacies, these skills are something that are applicable throughout anything in life, any aspect of work, business, and even, things we enjoy as part of, just our social life, and our interaction with people, our peers, our employers, our family members, various relationships. These skills are definitely, applicable. And like I said, they already exist within us. But when you actually are aware of the levels as they are presented on this pyramid, you can actually make the skills work to your advantage in different situations, as you need to. Again, this is something that I've spoken about in a presentation which I titled Teaching a Tolerance for Homosexuality, but the actual presentation was Unlearning to Learn, or Learning to Unlearn Teaching Critical Thinking Skills in English for Academic Purposes. And the whole idea of unlearning to learn is because this pyramid is, you can actually pick and choose which skills you need when you need them, and of course a set of skills, so because they do build upon each other. So it's a really useful thing, because a lot of the things that people learn sometimes is only useful for a specific period in time or for a specific task. So if you can learn to unlearn those and relearn as you go along, it's a really useful thing, like I said, in all walks of life. So the pyramid, as you can see it, if we start here from the bottom, or what is considered to be the more simple critical thinking skills, we start with remembering, which is basically the ability to recall facts and basic concepts, and then we move up to understanding, where a person is able to explain ideas or concepts. If we move up again, applying, this is where a person can actually use the information in new situations. Again, this is applicable to all walks of life. It doesn't have to be in academic literacy. It could be simply in another area. If we take something like woodwork or painting or something that is very hands-on, this is something that obviously people do practice. And of course, if they're able to, again, be aware of when they need to do this, and how to make it work for them and their own learning and progression in life. And then here we move up to what is considered to be the more complex critical thinking skills. And we have analyzing, whereby a person starts drawing connection among ideas. And this is where you really look at the why and the how of the way things are. So it's really looking closely. And if you think about this, if you think of a child, around 2 years old, and they start asking you questions, why is something like this? Why is something like that? like I said again, this is something that is innate. It exists in all people. But depending on what culture people are in, this ability, this cognitive ability can be really suppressed. So if you come from a traditionally really conservative culture, it's actually quite unfortunate for children because they may be encouraged to not ask questions like that because it's seen as rude, it's seen as, challenging authority. But of course, in other cultures, we want to encourage this and we want to develop it. And if you think about developing that skill where people can stand up for themselves, stand up for what they believe, that leads to being able to challenge figures in authority to prevent certain practices such as corruption and human rights abuses. So it's something that may seem quite simple, and it is quite simple, but the actual implication of it is really far reaching, and it's something that, like I said, if we're not careful, our certain cultural practices can suppress people's ability to analyze, which is a shame because it does exist. And like I said, when I gave you the idea of toddlers, when they ask why is something like this, why is something like that, and then they get told, either if they are lucky, the person who they're asking will probe that and encourage it, and if not, if there is a certain fear or cultural inacceptability about it, then they will be encouraged not to ask questions like that. And I was actually speaking to an American friend of mine, Dr. John, who it was just the other day actually, we had this conversation, and there's a saying, which is a Japanese saying, that where you have a bed of nails and the one that sticks out, it's your responsibility to hammer the nail in so it blends in with the rest, which is really captures the essence of what I'm saying, just because that shows many cultural practices where if somebody does stand out and they do ask questions from a young age, that ability can be completely suppressed, and the suppression of it, then people grow up to almost not possess that skill, because it was like a flame that was put out. It's like blowing out a candle, essentially. And then, you look at other things where children ask, for example, oh, why does it rain? Now, that can go two ways. You can either, look at it, and this ability, this rather complex ability, can be nurtured, and you can look into it, and then that will allow for exploration and real learning at this point. Or if it's a cultural thing where people misinterpret religion, or they misinterpret it for blasphemy, then again people don't have a chance because it's seen as a sin. And this is actually very interesting because I knew somebody whose daughter asked her, where does Allah get rain from? And even though she didn't tell her daughter off, she felt embarrassed because, one, she didn't know what to say. And the interesting thing is that's a very normal thing for somebody to ask. Obviously, religiously, if you say that, a God is a God of creation, and then you have rain, it's completely normal for a child to ask that. Now, if the parents haven't been nurtured themselves in the capacity to embrace that kind of analytical thinking, then what happens is, either from a point or position of ignorance or their own incapacity to analyze themselves, because that's the way they've been raised, they will totally negate that possibility for the child to express those analytical skills of the why and the how something is the way it is. Whereas if a parent, like myself, if I was to have a child who asked me that, then it would be like, actually, this is a great question. And the interesting thing is that there is a concept in Islam called tadabbur, which encourages contemplation. And what is contemplation? Contemplation is a form of analytical thinking, where you're looking at the why and the how. But of course, like I said, again, cultural practices, they infiltrate religious practices, and this, is far-reaching, like I said, and we end up with a lot of cultures that are overly conservative. And whilst, being conservative isn't necessarily a bad thing, it can be in the sense that where these cognitive abilities are suppressed, because then what that paves the way is for a very passive society. And a passive society means that there are plenty of opportunities for people in positions of power and authority to abuse that, which obviously leads to issues of corruption, issues of social injustice, human rights abuses. So, like I said, it's very simple in terms of, yes, this hierarchy, this pyramid can be used in academic literacies, but when we go beyond academic literacies, we actually look at the purpose of education to open people's minds, the purpose of education to emancipate people from oppression, which is very much the work of critical pedagogy theorists such as the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. We look and we see, actually, this is a really important thing. And if you have a generation that is, as popular culture puts it these days, woke, then of course, people are able to stand up and really challenge any kind of oppression that seeks to destroy their well-being and their quality of life. So as you can see, I was speaking about the critical thinking concept of analyzing, which is looking at the why and the how something is the way it is. And that's where, people are able to draw connection amongst ideas. So it goes beyond simply just recalling basic facts and concepts. But of course, you can see in order to analyze, you do need to embody the previous skills, which are considered to be the lower level critical thinking skills. Now, of course, the reason why I went into that mini discussion there, because analyzing, I think, really demonstrates the concept of why it's important for us to educate students in being aware of this hierarchy of critical thinking skills and the fact that they possess it. And our job as educators is to really probe it and, ignite that switch and get them to use it, not just for academic literacies, but as much as they can in all walks of life. So then if we go further up, evaluating is a higher level. And here, the justification of a standard decision really is pushing the boundaries of things, where you're assessing the value of something, and you really have to look deeply. So it embodies analyzing, applying, understanding. Of course, you wouldn't be able to do it without understanding the ideas or concepts, and you wouldn't be able to understand without being able to remember the basic concepts. So none of these are kind of independent. They all, like I said, build upon each other. And then when we get to the top, now, this is the interesting, when students say to me, how can I get the top mark? And because I do teach a lot of students who do come from very teacher-led, teacher-controlled environments. I teach a lot of Chinese students. I teach a lot of Middle Eastern students. And of course, I'm familiar with the way the Nigerian education system is. Students are treated as just empty vessels a lot of the time, where they are considered to come to class or come to school empty, and then the teacher's job is to pour the knowledge in. So basically what that kind of education system does is limit them to the very low level critical thinking skills, because basically if you're just going to tell somebody something and you expect them to just remember and understand and then just regurgitate it, so in an exam just say everything, then the highest level you're getting to in getting them to fully expand on the skills that they do possess innately as human beings is only as far as applying. So you're still at the lower level critical thinking skills, remembering, understanding and applying, and that is not what we want. And I think definitely in Western systems of education, for example in the United Kingdom, students are very much encouraged to apply they're encouraged to, really manifest all the way up to the top. However, even within the UK system of schooling, this hierarchy of critical thinking skills isn't something that is shared widely with students. It's something, obviously, teachers we learn this when we're doing our teacher training, but it's not something that is presented to the students, even though these skills are encouraged in the activities and in the pedagogy and the way the teaching is done. And I think it's really useful for students to be engaged within the practice of where the teacher shares this, puts it up at the beginning of the lesson and say, where are we? What are we doing? Look at the task that we are working on, and what skills do you think you're being asked to present? I think that is so powerful and so useful. So again, at the top, creating, this is where really when students want the top marks, they need to be demonstrating, at least the analysing part, the evaluating part, and then definitely the creating, where you embody all these skills and that allows you to produce a new or original work. And if you think about it, that's what a PhD is. And a PhD is the highest academic qualification you can have. And the reason why you're able to get to that top of the pyramid is because basically you are producing something that hasn't been done before, or you're introducing an interpretation of something that hasn't been interpreted in that way. So again, it's a creation, because you have looked at the why and how of something, you've drawn connections among ideas, you've evaluated, you've really looked and assessed the value of something, and then of course you're able to, based on that, if you've looked at something in terms of, evaluating it, you've looked at the strengths, you looked at the weaknesses, and if you look at the weaknesses and you've seen the strength, then there's a gap there where you are now able to think, okay, that doesn't work, and I'm going to develop something that does work, whatever that is. It could be something really simple, like, well, actually building a chair isn't simple, but what I'm trying to convey is just the difference. It doesn't have to be an academic literacy. It could literally be, building a reclining chair that hovers all the way to the kitchen. It's something that hasn't been done before. So if you are able to do that, then of course you've applied all the skills here, but you've really demonstrated the higher level critical thinking skill. So I hope that discussion there has given you an insight into the effectiveness and usefulness of being aware of the pyramid, the hierarchy that presents itself in the form of the lower level critical thinking skills and the higher level critical thinking skills. And like I said, all of them are important, but they serve different functions. And of course, they can be used for various walks of life. And it also allows us to do an important concept, which I discussed in one of my previous presentations, unlearning to unlearn, because it's not everything we learn that is always useful to us, and sometimes it's useful to us only up to a certain point or for a certain time, and then we need to unlearn it and relearn something. So this is an introduction to the pyramid. I have done some further work on this, and I do have some material, in particular how to use Bloom's taxonomy for academic reading, in order to obviously demonstrate that you are using the critical thinking skills, so you're not just passively reading. Of course, that will be reflected in your academic writing. So if you do want to have a look at that and see how you can get the most out of academic reading critically rather than passively, then of course join me on my community. The link is in my description bar, or you can head over to my Patreon. The links are all here, and you'll be able to access my refined tutorials and worksheets that show you how to really use Bloom's taxonomy for successful academic reading and of course intent academic writing. So thank you very much for watching. Of course, please, if you haven't subscribed already, do subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up and share it with anyone else who you think will benefit from being able to be aware of the critical thinking skills that they possess and how to exploit that to their advantage in all walks of life, whether it's academic literacies or other areas. that we engage ourselves in. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.